Today we're going to hear some words of wisdom and insight from an important thinker here in Canada. His name is Michel Kelly-Gagnon, who is one of the co-founders of Amis de la Liberté, Friends of Liberty, in the 1990s, and helped relaunch what used to be called the Montreal Economic Institute to the MEI. He has been president of the Quebec Employers Council, practicing lawyer and entrepreneur, and he was one of 6 Quebecers honored in Canada's top 40 under 40 in 2008. He has served on many boards, including the Canada Foundation for Innovation. He's a senior fellow of the Atlas Network, as well as the Frontier Center for Public Policy, and the trustee of the John Dobson Foundation. What I just learned, and I didn't realize before, is that Mr. Gagnon was on the Manning panel that went and had this analysis of what transpired and what needs to be fixed following the COVID mandates or process. He was also very involved in writing many of the amendments in the new Bill of Rights that just got passed in the legislature last session, and writing much of the new curriculum for social studies in the K-12 new curriculum that is being introduced into the schools now. So had a lot of influence here in Alberta and previously in Quebec, and I'm really excited about what he's going to have to talk about in terms of freedom. What a concept. So with no further ado, Mr. Gagnon, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Myles. Thank you, Allison, and your whole crew. You really did a good job, and I'm really pleased to spend some time with you guys. Just a factual clarification. So the curriculum was written by professionals from the social study curriculum was written by professionals of the Department of Education of Alberta, but I was asked to provide comments and give feedback. I think if I had written the curriculum, it'd be quite different from what it is now, but we'll leave that aside. So the sort of anchor of my talk, and we've agreed that, we're going to go back and forth and talk about a wide variety of different topics, but nevertheless, the anchor of my talk is this notion that, let's say, right-of-center people, or if you want to say conservative or classical liberals, there are many denominations we can use, but, that sort of political family, broadly speaking. Well, there's a bit of feedback, but by and large, we tend to use rational arguments in order to make our case. We tend to use statistics. We tend to talk about, let's say, how our policy recommendations are good for, employment creation and economic growth. And I think these arguments are really good arguments, but I think they're incomplete. Several years ago, I was in Washington, D.C., participating on a panel, and I said the following statement. I said, voters vote their pocketbook. And there was a member of the panel, Larry Smith, who is the founder of the Leadership Institute. Some of you may know of that organization. And he, quite frankly, completely destroyed me and said, that's not true, actually. People say that, but actually people vote, by and large, their values. Yes, pocketbook issues can have an impact, but first and foremost, they vote what they feel is the right thing to do. They vote in favor of what corresponds to their deeply held values. And he proceeded at, quoting a whole bunch of studies, and then after that, and for you, I don't know if any of you have known Larry Smith, but he could be a little insistent, and so, after that, he sent me, several emails, with documentation, and basically, I will say he kind of convinced me and helped me change my mind on that. And since that encounter, I am now of the view that people, first and foremost, vote their values. Because think of this, okay? Why would it be the case, like the richest, when you look at the map, like of writings, okay, and you cross-reference it to income, by and large, let's say Rosedale, which is one of the highest, income, it's a Toronto. They vote Liberals. Most of the time, they vote Liberals, and they vote Liberals big time. And in Westmount, which is an extremely wealthy riding of Montreal, they always vote Liberal, not Conservative, Liberal. And go back in New Brunswick and spot the highest earning, per capita, of the voters. And again, that particular riding always votes Liberal. So, and Larry made that point also, with U.S. counties, showing that, affluent New Yorkers, affluent Californians, they vote Democrat. They don't vote Republican. So anyway, so that's the sort of first point I want to make. Assuming that that thesis is true, it means that conservatives have to integrate more into their discourse values and principles. Again, not to say that they shouldn't use statistics, but they should be more upfront about what they're advocating, what are the values and principles, and why are these ideas noble and valuable ideas. And so, for instance, when defending, let's say, the oil patch and the oil industry, typically advocate of the industries or conservative politicians will point out to how many jobs have been created, how many taxes are paid by the oil companies, and that kind of stuff. But I think that the real argument is that it's an industry that provides reliable and affordable energy for the people. And that reliable and affordable energy is something that allows for human beings to have a stable life and to flourish. And so I think that's those kinds of arguments that we need to do more. And then the last point I'll say on this specific point is that the Templeton Foundation, which was created by famed investor John Templeton, you can look up on their website, they talk a lot about human flourishment. And it's really this idea that, because again, what the left will make a caricature that all we want is money, that we put profit over people, yada, 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 yada. And if we can counter that to say, no, our philosophy is about human flourishment, and freedom is not a sufficient condition for human flourishment, but it's a necessary precondition. Because you cannot flourish if you don't have a life that has volition, that has agency, where you're making choices, both small choices but big choices, where you feel empowered in your life. And all of that can only happen if you are a free individual. So I think that if you remember only one thing of my presentation tonight, would be that we collectively and individually in the different contexts where we're called upon to talk about conservative and classical liberal ideas, that we must first state the values and the principles, and then after that go with pocketbook issues. And I think, I believe that Pierre Poilievre understands that, because when you look at his discourse, he usually starts by saying, we want to make Canada the freest country on earth. And then he goes on and talks obviously about housing and about inflation, but the core or the overarching theme is that he wants to make Canada the freest country on earth. So I think that whether explicitly or intuitively, I haven't that conversation with him, but I think he gets it. So that's sort of my first point. The second point is I want to talk a little bit about the current trade war. So I've penned a piece that's been published in The Hub, which, if some of you are not familiar, it's a magazine online where a lot of their content is available for free. It's a very it's I would say, broadly speaking, a conservative magazine, and Sean Speer, who was a key guy in the Harper government, is one of the co-editors. But it's a very thoughtful, and their motto is less noise, more signal. And it's really kind of an approach where the pieces are, it's not about name calling, it's not about, insulting adversaries, it's about serious discussions on serious issues. So I invite you to have a look at The Hub. Very easy to find. You just Google The Hub, or you go thehub.ca. And I had a piece published yesterday in The Hub called In the Trade War, something like In the Trade War, we must go back to first principles. And the key points, and so hopefully you'll read that article, but the key points that, I'm sorry?
What is first principle?
Yeah, so first principles in the sense of fundamental principles, meaning the principles from which everything else spans. If I'm going to use some very fancy language, it can also be called as axiomatic truths. Those who've done some philosophy amongst you will know what I'm referring to, but first principles or fundamental principles. So thank you for asking. To me, some of the key principles that have been forgotten by, I would say, 99% of the commentators, whether on the left or the right or on the center or the confused ones, they forgot about a couple of key things in my view. So here's a very short summary of my article. One is they forgot that even though we talk about trade between Canada, quote unquote, and the US, quote unquote, in reality, trade is done between companies and individuals. And so you will have an American company, for instance, that sells a product to a Canadian consumer. We call that Canada-US or US-Canada trade, but it's not the country of Canada that's trading with the country of the United States. It's that particular individual who's buying that product. It may seem simple, but I tell you, if you kind of really zoom in on what it means, it changes your perspective, because it's really like it brings you to another perspective. The other point that I make in this article is that counter tariffs usually will, so like say, oh, we're going to fight the Americans, we'll have counter tariffs. But counter tariffs actually in many cases hurt more Canadians than they will hurt Americans. And the metaphor that I use is, and I used this metaphor at the beginning of my article, I say, imagine a situation where you have two people having a heated argument, whatever is the reason of their debate. And at some point, voices get raised and, they're almost shouting at each other. And then one of the, two belligerent reaches for a bag that's next to him, pulls out a hammer, and smashes head with the hammer very hard. So his forehead is bleeding. You can almost see his bone, he's really hurting. And then imagine that the other person goes, ha, okay, you're gonna do this? Steals the hammer from his hand and swims himself twice. Goes, you swim yourself once? Ow, ow, there you go. Well, that's essentially a counter tariff. And so does that mean we can do nothing? No. I think that the best course of action would be using tribunals, because the alleged, because right now they haven't been imposed, as you saw, the tariffs that Trump says he wants to impose, he's invoking a particular act that's related to specific emergencies. And all of my friends who are trade specialists, and I am not a trade specialist, but I have friends who are trade specialists, including in Washington, D.C., say that that's wholly illegal. And that if Canada were to challenge both on the panels of the free trade agreement, as well as in federal courts, they would win. And so, and by the way, I think the Canadian government agrees with me. I'm told that they've given a mandate to one of the biggest law firm in Washington, D.C., that law firm is preparing a court, some actions that would be filed if tariffs. So my view is that using the tribunals in order to basically stop these wholly illegal actions would be a much better course than trying to get in the game of counter tariffs. And anecdotally, I was speaking to a money manager here in Calgary, and he's invested in the energy industry. Like, his firm is specialized in investing in Canadian energy companies. And we were asking what would be the impact of the Trump tariffs in the companies that they're invested in, because I was part of a group of people that were deciding whether to invest in his firm, in one of his funds. And he didn't know that I had written that article. And he said, actually, we've made a review of this, and the counter tariffs would hurt more the companies we're invested in than the tariffs themselves. So I had just kind of a confirmation from someone who is just like, he's a money manager. He's not trying to make like a philosophical point or anything, but he was kind of confirming that at least in the energy companies, which are all Canadian energy companies that he was invested in, the counter tariffs would create more harm. So that's sort of the second angle. And you know what? I think I'll stop it there and let us open for conversation, more time for conversation.